Hi, welcome to another edition of What the Fuck Happenings here in Mendham and such. That's no such part actually, but anyway, yeah, it's me plus whatever stuff in the background and whatnot to influence you into not being as big an asshole. Moderate a little bit. I just read a couple of comments, and one guy said something like, "Well, I can't help being a cunt, so I won't have kids, but yeah, in every other respect, I'll remain a selfish asshole." I mean, you're just saying, okay, that's fine. You can't what? You can't apply logic. You can't do it. I mean, to reject it when you know it's the truth, well, that's just being really stupid. But that's exactly how humans get into all this capacity to be tremendous assholes. Is somehow they have an ability to step right over the truth, like it's nothing, like it's dog do, and we don't have to pay attention. Don't know exactly how to metaphor that. I mean, you could have a barrel full of stuff that says dioxin right on the barrel, and you just tip it into one of the Great Lakes, for no good reason. I don't know. Does it make any sense? No, it's just bullshit. So anyway, so yes, just more of this reasoning, trying to just to present some what I consider to be logic, to make it understandable. About what's happening here on planet Earth, and it's just these brains that have this language, and then the language gives us concepts that we can throw at each other, ideas, and and have a fair fight, over what's a rational story, description of the reality, and what's a bunch of nonsense and rubbish. And so the true story is, yes, we're just bugs, frankly. And we have some extra smarts, and we can use them to scheme like bugs, or we can use them to define better goals, and then we can scheme to accomplish the better goal. And the better goal is not to be a taker, and not to give kids cancer, and not to, force somebody else to die for no good reason. Sign them up for a war they can't win. Nobody's going to win. Nobody leaves a winner. It just doesn't happen. Now, some people are lucky, and they die in a few milliseconds. But most of us, not so lucky. And again, it is sort of the irony that people have so much compassion and empathy. They weep so much, so to speak, over people who are killed instantly, like the plane crashes and stuff. And oh, isn't it awful? Well, frankly, compared to what would have been, all those people would have died. How many of them, like 85% of them, would have died a much horrible death, much more horrible. I mean, not too many of them were going to die in some other plane crash. They weren't going to, it wasn't going to be quick. So the majority of them got off kind of fairly easy, right? I mean, their families didn't do too good in some cases. But again, that's some cases too, because in a lot of cases, yeah, the standard isn't necessarily the best. What is can be improved. And often it's improved by just getting rid of the shithead humans who are in the way. But anyway, just saying, that it it is a little bit incoherent in terms of a rational statement to say people die really quick, that it's a bigger tragedy or something, a greater tragedy that they were pulled out of their life. Unless they were really going to do something. And frankly, not too many people are going to do anything useful. Now, I can argue for my own usefulness, because frankly, too few, let's just put it that way, can seem to articulate this statement about the fact that life has this negative character, and it's just built into it. It's, you know, it's just a trail of tears, frankly. You know, and you can pretend that sandwich time is fun enough, you know, to justify the rest of the horrors, but it really isn't. The little happy meals really don't add up to, oh, that was worth it, because it won't be worth it. But anyway, so yeah, it's another video in, and so I'm trying to, you know, I'm trying to narrow the argument into this conciser language and formula, and part of that process is, you know, thinking of it in terms of simple principles and premises. And if you have those, I just don't see any alternative conclusion. Then, yeah, you got to stop people from just forcing us to arrive here and play this shitty game, because that's the only way to stop it from continuing to happen. I'm just going to have to keep showing up here against my, you know, against the judgment I have now, and you'll make me stupid and ignorant again, and now I have to start all over and figure out that, oh, I'm on a planet full of assholes, and I have to do all that shit all over again. And I don't want to do that over and over again. I don't want to play the bad game over and over and over again. And I've had it pretty good, and it's not good enough. Yeah, not even close. Anyway, so that's the story, that's the argument, blah blah blah. You have to go through all this crap to just basically sell the idea that you know, we're just singing and dancing. You know, this little trivial stuff we think is important is just bullshit. And we're doing it at this insanely expensive price of absolute torture. And that's really dumb. Alright, yeah, that's probably good enough for a start. And so let's see what he has to say. Yeah, my muse. I'm mused by myself. It's, yeah, well, it's probably the best alternative, right? I wish there were some other person to muse me, but there really aren't too many. Sadly. Yeah. Tragically, frankly. Blah blah blah, and go through this routine. That doesn't seem to isolate the problem as well as I thought it might. Okay, so I was thinking of, you know, just a bunch of questions about, well, do you believe in God? You know, I've tried this before, and I sort of want to do that in the sense that I just want to argue with the people for the subject that needs to be argued, instead of arguing with everybody and going into all the details of why there's not a God and why there's no free will and all that crap. Just try to get people who are in those categories now, just make a video to them. But it really isn't that simple. I guess partly, again, I can bring up the analogy of the arguments I've been making with physicists, and how, you know, they're smart people, you know, and they know some of these facts, but they still can't even tell when they've been lied to and duped, and, you know, they believe something that just isn't true because they really haven't thought through very far, you know, that they haven't really understood, you know, the real mechanism. I mean, even getting the idea, you know, like in physics, I'm sort of arguing it's a push-averse. You know, there's no pulls. There's just stuff banging into stuff. So you have to push something. You can never... A pull is just the absence of a push. So, you know, if you don't push this way, well, then the thing pushing the other way wins. And so that's all that it is. It's a competition around pushing. And, you know, life is a... You know, it's just a competition around evading the negative. That's what we think a positive is. When we gain immunity to something, that's the positive. When we gain prevention of something, that's the positive. When we are mitigating against something, that's the positive. We have the morphine, the this, the that. It's always fixing a negative, not making a real positive. And, you know, it's just a little fact. But in the context of this conversation, it gets to be a big giant fact because it just points out how really ludicrous the game is. because we're really just in the quicksand, and we're really just trying to get a breath of air. And frankly, we should never exist playing we shouldn't be forced to play the game quicksand, because winning doesn't mean anything. Winning means you're wet and you can breathe, and that's all, and you don't get anything else. There's no real prizes here. There's no victory. You're just defeating defeat. Defeating defeat is not winning. And that seems probably just as good a way of isolating where somebody disagrees anyway. Right, so I'm thinking, we'll maybe just go with the fact thing, and start off with your first principles. How does the thing, what is it? Well, it's a brain, okay? And what happens to it? Well, it shows up, and it takes it a while to get oriented, to figure out what gravity is and figure out how to move its pieces. And then there's a moment, a time, when it starts playing for real, okay, once it gets that fundamental bit settled. And it starts making memories and starts creating an organized bunch of synonyms for life and experiences and ways of defining value through its interaction with things. So some people, some people have a bad experience, with something, and it becomes an issue. It's like some people are, I'm blighted by an anxiety disorder that has, I suppose, some irrational elements. And it's like some people can have a fear of needles at the doctor or something. You could stick needles in me all day long and I couldn't care less. It's just all that kind of stuff. We all become sensitive to very different things, and we gain what's called a personality based on our conditioning and our experiences through this maturation part. Blah, 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 blah. And it's all just kind of arbitrary. It's not very... the plan isn't to create something smart. So there's just way too much chaos for that. Smart is almost one road. There's like not a whole bunch of roads to it. You have to get one fact right, then the next fact right, the next fact right, the next fact. And if you get any of them wrong, then you start going all kinds of sideways. It's exciting, all kinds of categories that your daily adventure is going to be described as. Yeah, so your brain is just constantly taking in everything, and it's building, it's throwing it onto the existing model and modifying it and correcting it in some respects, so you can get out of some of your conditioning by having positive reinforcement. That's a therapy. But it's almost impossible to create that therapy if something really does suck. It's hard to create positive experiences with a brain tumor. It just ain't going to happen. Reckless than reasonable, and then it biases some people to be less adventurous than reasonable. Right, so we all become a personality type, and yes, you can pigeonhole and all that stuff. I don't know if that's very useful. But we definitely become people of a, aggressive versus passive, risk averse versus reckless, these kind of categories, and those are categories we're talking about. People living in diluted optimism versus excessive pessimism. They could all be argued to be excesses in all these kind of features of your personality, and some of it is earned in terms of it's based on your education and finding out the details. So it's like you wouldn't really appreciate a risk, let's say, unless you really understood a genetic risk, let's say, unless you understood the genetic formula. Because if the risk is 1 in 1,000, well, then you say, okay, it's fine, I'll take my chances. But if the risk is 1 in 10, it might completely change whether you're going to shove your money into, you know, that risk. Into these first principles idea, where you can just define, you know, just some facts about what it is to be alive and human on planet Earth. Right. So it's, again, the first principle to me is the most, you know, the one that's the most, has the most meaning, is the idea of first principle, just recognizing that value is something created by brains, and that it doesn't exist until there's a brain that can feel, that can have a good day or a bad day. If there's no brain that can have a good day or a bad day, then there's no conversation about value. There's just no way the worst scenario can be any different than the best scenario, because if you're not making something feel better, you're not making anything. And so that is a very strong first principle of at least getting past the part where you first figure out you're not magic dust, and there's not fairies and fairy godmothers, and there's not all this other fable-y crap. The first principle is basically, well, what's this all about? And it's all about the manifestation of feelings that are created inside of a brain. A brain's function produces them, just like it does produce thoughts, and just as it does produce words, it produces feelings. You know, none of that's going to put you in a very good mood. So yeah, I have to say that, you know, like most other things in my life, it was, what am I talking about? Being sexual was great. Oh, gee, that's a dangerous subject. Yeah, I didn't really want to get into that. You know, but just, you know, as you're ordering what your brain is doing, there's this part of it that's just scheming, and it ends up scheming because of personal ambitions and personal agendas. You get hungry and you scheme for food, so to speak, and we have other drives and desires, and we scheme to satisfy them. It's like, you know, if the air is stuffy, you open the window. Okay, so if you're horny, you go blah blah blah. You seek satisfaction and gratification, and unfortunately we get quite distracted by the personal adventure and lose sight of the social adventure and the world adventure. So the real game is the world game. You could even say the universe game, but I could argue that the universe isn't doing this. We're doing it, but the universe isn't. You know, it's just such a preposterously bizarre manifestation of chemistry, you know, for it to go this far, to first make living things, then make them a slave to the creation of some other thing, double life, or whatever you want to call multicellular organisms, double life, you know, and then to have a brain, you know, because of one particular cell that's electrical, blah blah blah. I mean, it's all so that's part of the story, is just recognizing how bizarre the chemistry is, you know, it wouldn't make any difference if even if it was 1 in a gazillion, and so it could happen twice in this universe, or it could happen 7 times in this universe. It wouldn't make any difference, because it wouldn't mean that that circumstance is any more, you know, a good, or it's not a good thing by nature. It's not a good thing. The whole construct is way too delicate and way too sensitive to be clumsily thrown around by the ape of nature. The ape of nature can't do this, the delicate scalpel surgery that needs to be done when you're playing with a feeling organism. You know, yes, apes can raise apes, but, you know, you're going to build a human being. It's a lot more complicated. That's if I was to use an analogy. Yeah, sloppy ain't going to be good enough. Whatever the version of it is, that kind of thing. All right. That's a beginning anyway. Well, that's not a very good stopping point, so we'll see where I started. Or something like that. Sorry, furnace. Maybe end up with double furnace noises. Stuck with that. Now I could say my brain says, but it just doesn't, me brain says, yeah, been there and done that. It's important to some people, right? So that's a niche audience that's sort of stuck in my head, is these people who want to play games about what's conscious, or identifying the origin of our identity. That is, the fact that I'm a little construction, you're a construction, we're all little constructions, and some people want to pretend that somehow that's all the same construction, when obviously they are uniquely different constructions. They're all different patterns, and they're going to have to interact in some way with this goal of coherent behavior, accomplishing something we have to accomplish together. None of this can be stopped unless we do it as a collective. We can't, we can't build the dam by ourselves. We can't, it's too big a project for one person. One person can't prevent harm in the future. It has to be something we do collectively. I can't stop somebody from recklessly having a kid that'll end up being somebody like me, who's not going to have all these positive experiences and just is going to feel like they've been imprisoned for 80 years maybe. Anyway, take a pause. Alright, back quieter now. Anyway, see how long that lasts. So I move something, right? Yeah, and that makes a difference. Everything makes a difference, and that really is the irritating part. That's this psychology that keeps getting in the way. So depending on who's making the argument, how they look, and all this other crap that shouldn't make any difference, and it makes this gigantic difference, and that just ruins part of this process, because we really just can't communicate, just the words. And I guess that's the advantage of books, is that you don't know who's saying this stuff, so you can't pass judgment based on knowing who's saying it. Sometimes you can't know who's saying it. Yeah, so it doesn't even work all the time either. Anyway, moving on. Hey, look, there's a whole world to figure out and do something in. And if parents are just playing the game, they're just doing, playing the small game. So that's, you're always going to be maturated by people playing the small game, frankly. You're always going to be raised by somebody playing the small game, and you're going to I would hope for you that you would have the pleasure of actually being a participant in recognizing the game is more than just being a reproducing bug, and playing family. There's a lot more going on planet Earth than I don't know, silverware and plates and such. The picket fence bullshit about what part of it is, a waste, a preventable waste, and what part of it is, well, how can you uncondition yourself? So that's, so that's like this mind over matter kind of tricky part of being able to deal with your psychology and put it in its place. And to some extent, you can also use that to make it easier by recognizing that you're the only thing you have control over is you. I can't just use my magic powers and make things change in the world. I can only change how I interact with the world, in the sense that I can be aware of that, and I can use words and concepts can pop into my mind that can give me that power. So if I have some knowledge that, oh yes, I don't have to react. So a circumstance can happen and it can match these things. And instead of being triggered, because my brain says when these 4 things happen, I have to do a certain thing. My brain's going to react a certain way. I can realize that, well, wait a minute, I don't have to. I can count to 10. I can just pretend it didn't happen. So in some sense, reactions aren't automatic. Now, they're determined. It's determined whether you have knowledge of that key, if you can open that door or not. And so some people can open doors of their psychology and control some of their reactions, and other people can't. Knowing that there are keys is one thing. Being able to find the key is another thing. So I'd argue I haven't been able to exploit that capacity very much, but I understand it exists, and it does create opportunity to be able to get past the fact that the only way you can fight the war is you have to be strong enough to fight it. You can't get, you can't let the foxhole wear you down, and it will wear you down if you don't protect your sanity, so to speak, by using the simple tricks of just recognizing it's all just a brain reacting, and you can use thoughts to wind it out slower. You can slow it down. You can change the reactions by just allowing that sequence of practiced steps. But see, I don't want to make a psychology video now, as much as some people might need one. I'm just not I'm not proficient enough in manipulating my own inability to separate myself from depression and despair to offer advice. And it does get kind of dangerous. I suppose that's part of it too. There's a risk of opening yourself up to even more disorder by creating a, it's like any kind of, you're inviting manifestations or symptoms that might be worse than the ones you're dealing with now. And so I guess that's why I also avoid it, is because every person's going to need a different pill, so to speak. Anyway, it's really not the subject, but it's just this it's always a subtlety to this conversation about the deterministic nature, and the fact that it doesn't change the fact that we are evolving in a direction. So the determinism is you have to play your part in the determinism. It wasn't determined that we would win World War II if nobody showed up to fight in World War II. So we all have to read our scripts, so to speak. We have to do our parts. The outcome won't be success, it'll be failure. I would have appreciated if somebody had told me that when I was 10 years old. That it's all in your head. Your reactions are the only thing you control. And again, the control is a subtle word. I'm saying that your intellect can control your monkey psychology to some extent. It can put it on a leash. And I'm not saying it's any much further than that, except that, yes, and that's part of the intellectual evolution, is understanding that our thoughts can be better than our impulses. And the only way to make impulses better is to make thoughts better. Something like that. Whatever the gratification in some kind of higher-minded, okay? Again, the game isn't just you. It's a multiplayer game. This is a really important thing for you to understand, that what happens doesn't just happen to you, it happens to every single other feeling thing. Form that makes you feel like you're winning. I don't know. So yeah, you can just delude yourself. You can use imagination and fantasy and a lot of things as a weapon against your obsessive, compulsive need to to think you need to actually win to feel like a winner, something like that. Anyway, you can fight the negative consequences of your conditioned reactions, which are usually not very smart. Or which one has better odds, or so if you have a negative experience in interacting with the world, you might have a greater passion to understand how things work. Right, so there might be a correlation between these things, unfortunately, that people that find it easy to navigate don't worry about figuring out how the thing works, because it's working. It's getting them from here to there, so they don't need to know as much. But if you're in a car that, say, doesn't work, I mean, in the sense it doesn't get you where you want to go, you might be a lot more interested in how the car works and trying to figure out why it's not getting you where you want it to go. So obviously people who have a problem are the ones that are going to be more interested in finding out how things work. They'd just be wrong, right? Because they didn't have enough information. So that sort of gets to, so that's another part of the conversation, is just, it's such an empowering tool. I mean, knowledge is power. And in some respects, it's just really important to understand how it works if you're going to be able to use it effectively. And so, I could just go back to the label on the dioxin barrel. I mean, if you're, if you're not paying attention to the labels and getting it right, knowing the difference between water and poison, you're not going to live a very productive existence. But you're doing that in the context of the experience having value, in the terms of it being good to feel good and bad to feel bad. Right, so that's what all of this ends up being, is just, it doesn't matter all this talking about being smart, being this and being that. The bottom line is what's your net footprint in terms of, how much torture did you cause, how much torture did you prevent? And that's pretty much all that matters. That's the only thing that should be on your tombstone, is were you a winner, good for feeling things, or were you bad for feeling things? And I'd argue that any one of you who is pro-life and creating more people to die in the future, you're bad for feeling things. The price we pay for our existence. And it's just so ironic that because of the silly people so I was just talking about religious people and how it's just so ironic that they make life so much worse than it has to be by prohibiting rational death, that we should die well. And because they find that an offense to God, who's controlling everything, and that we're not allowed to find God's judgment insufficient, that somehow we're supposed to be tortured to death because it's God's will. It's just so idiotic. And so that's just so ironic that the pro-lifers are so delusionally stupid that they can't even figure out they're hurting their own cause by projecting this notion that they have to defend the entire creation, so they have to defend the horrible death. And if they would moderate that nonsense, their beliefs wouldn't be, the end product would be life wouldn't be as bad, and there'd probably be more people that could be pro-life, you know, because it wouldn't be as bad because you didn't have this horrible death thing hanging over your head. And it also would be a huge release of resources in the sense that we'd save so much money, you know, that we could, you know, improve the quality of life for so many people. But instead, wasted suffering, wasted pain, and wasted resources. Just almost a sadistic cruelty placed on the altar of their loving God. It's, you know, the ironies are so thick that wouldn't have been triggered if I didn't do that. Okay, so if they didn't quite see what's happening. So I was just doing the thing where I can just change something, and all of a sudden I changed everything. You know, one little act can make this gigantic difference somehow. Somehow this triggers something in your brain, and now your brain does XYZ. And that's how arbitrary it all is. It's just almost ironically imbecilic, you know, ludicrous speed. I mean, it's just ludicrous that, you know, this mush decides the fate of sentient organisms on Earth is going to be decided by the cartoon rather than the science. You're really broken. That can be stated, okay? Doesn't matter. Yes, I was talking a little bit about the determinism part and the fact that some people would argue that somehow because it's not the person's fault they're an idiot, that it means they're not an idiot. Well, no, they're still an idiot. So if they're cruel, sadistic, loony crazies, that's what they are, okay? And, you know, not being their fault, that doesn't mean anything, okay? It doesn't change anything. Again, you know, because the higher mind isn't saying, I need to get revenge. I need to exchange torture for torture. The idea of punishment isn't to punish somebody for, you know, just to sit there and say, well, there's one blind person, let's make two blind people. It's not the eye for an eye, it's just retarded. Unless you clearly understand that the only point in doing it is to create prevention. That is to instill in people who might consider being an asshole that asshole won't be very profitable. And that's deterrence, and that's a really important function. We are actually affected by deterrence. We are incentivized to do things, and we are discouraged into not doing other things, and it works. Encouragement and discouragement is effective. So it's just silly to say it's not their fault, therefore we should do nothing. The last thing we should do is punish people randomly for crime. It makes sense to punish the criminals, frankly. It's logical. You know, whacking a few heads off. Perfectly reasonable, frankly. But this idea, you know, that because it's all determined, and it is, you know, I showed you my shirt, okay, because my brain came, yeah, so it was all predetermined that I would do something to change something, or I would do something, you know, and all of that is determined. But again, you can't change the evolution of knowledge. The fact that knowledge gets purified and refined and, you know, fixed. And that's what we are capable of doing. Now, right now, we're in idiocracy, you know, for the last 100 years. It's, you know, it's just getting worse and worse, I guess I could argue. And everything's turned into, you know, nonsense and silly and stupid. And it's tragic and sad, but I don't think it changes the fact that the more irrational parts of human manifestation, the sillier humans, should be in the progressing of ideas. People who enjoy dog fights or bullfights or some other kind of bullshit aren't going to be the future, would be the argument. Slow but sure, that kind of maturation into some kind of notion that that makes any sense will be defeated by the science that says, you know, animals aren't rocks, you know, they're brains, and they're brains that are, you know, handy capable, and they're certainly handy capable to feel. Can do reasonable things to mitigate against that waste. So again, you know, another little right to die. So I was sort of making the same argument that you know, it just makes sense to, once you've established the idea that it matters, that there's a cavern of difference between feeling good and feeling bad, and the difference is value, then you can understand that, yes, why would you squander or waste suffering? It's silly, crazy to do that. Ruin the fun. And such. And then, like I said, but different personalities end up going different ways. They double down. So some people, they feel good, and then they feel immune, and then they feel empowered, and then they... Yeah, so unfortunately, you know, you do have to pay to be intelligent, in the sense that you're likely not going to become intelligent unless you have an incentive, a personal incentive, to engage in that process of understanding, because you need to understand. And there's way too many people who don't, who get by without needing it. Arrangements inside of your brain, little neurons in certain configurations, and that configuration creates a feeling. So it's making it. So brains make thoughts and feelings. Okay, they make images, they make lots of different things, but they make the experience of the event. So just as the brain is making words, and it's making sentences, and it's making all that crap, it's also making all the internal stuff that only I am a party to. And it's all synthetic, but it's all real. I think I ended with that. Alright, so that's enough of it. It's all manufactured by the brain. Again, you're not really seeing the video technically. You're not really interacting with it as it is. You're interacting with what your brain has made out of it, an image of it, a representation of it. And in trying to represent the idea of necessity, the brain created value in terms of sensations. There's no value in the world until we showed up to interpret the existence of it, and in interpreting it, our brain is creating it. So it's one case, it's one of the few cases where the representation is more than the thing itself. So I could say that your image of a car is far short of car. You know, it's way incomplete in terms of you can't really experience all the elements of what it is. You can't see in between the sheet metal, and you can't see, you know, inside the tire, and you can't see, you know, there's a lot of stuff missing. And in this case, when the brain synthesized important, it gave it more importance. It gave the idea of important, you know, much more detail in terms of our feelings, much more character than just the word, so to speak, because of the fact that it created this hard value. So in trying to synthesize the idea of value, it made something real in terms of value. It made the real thing. The synthetic value created by our brain is the real value. And the thing that our brain associates with the feeling is the bullshit. Arbitrary in too many cases. Alright, anyway, I think that'll do. So, I think it's, you know, Again, you have to go to the website to watch the original video, but, I think it's worth it if you have the time. Blah, 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 blah. Got details in it I didn't get to. Yeah, but whatever. Yeah, you'll do what your brain decides. That's how it works. Yeah, but it's going to decide. It's not really going to choose. And it decided, frankly. The decision was already made yesterday, a million years ago. Unfortunately, we just are slaves to circumstance. So, till the next time, and such, and so forth, and whatnot. Blah, 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 blah. But what else could we be a slave to, right? There's nothing else. There's no other way to be there's no other way it could turn out than to have some mechanism that decides. And, circumstances better than random poof. So I suppose if I had to choose between random poof and, a conspiracy of trillions of events, I'd rather the conspiracy of a trillion events, because at least they have some progressive slope, where random doesn't have any slope. It doesn't, doesn't go anywhere. All right, enough of that then. Till the next time, and such, and so forth and whatnot. Yeah, that's right enough. Blah, 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 blah.